Welcome back. And top on the brief this morning, the Federal Executive Council has given final approval to the 2025 budget to be presented by President Bola Tinubu. Speaking to State House correspondents shortly after the FEC meeting chaired by President Tinubu at the Presidential Villa, the Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, Atiku Bagudu, said the total 2025 expenditure is projected at 47 trillion naira, 960 billion naira, which is an increase of 36.8% from the 2024 estimate.
And very shocking scenes coming courtesy of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, as it announced a landmark arrest of a total of 792 suspects for offenses bordering on cryptocurrency investment fraud and romance scam. The Director of Public Affairs of the EFCC, Mr. Wilson Owujaren, who briefed journalists at the Commission's office, said the suspects were apprehended in a surprise operation at their alleged hideout, a 7-story building known as Big Leaf Building in the Victoria Island area of Lagos.
And in business news, the National Bureau of Statistics says Nigeria's headline inflation rate rose to 34.60% in November 2024 from 33.88% in October 2024. The November inflation rate showed an increase of 0.72 percentage points compared with the October 2024 inflation rate. And that's according to MBS's latest Consumer Price Index report, which measures the rate of change in prices of goods and services.
Well, outside the country, rescuers face a race against time to reach survivors after a devastating cyclone tore through French Indian Ocean territory of Mayotte, destroying homes across the islands with hundreds feared dead. The cyclone has left health services in tatters, with the hospital extremely damaged and health centers knocked out of operation, that's according to the health minister.
And in sports, cheery news as Ademola Lookman crowned 2024 CAF Player of the Year. And Ademola has been crowned, yes, at the historic event that confirms his status as one of the best players in the world in the current calendar year. His win means the award remains in Nigeria after teammate Victor Osimhen won it last year. Meanwhile, Super Falcons' Chiamaka Nnadozie has once again been crowned the CAF Women's Goalkeeper of the Year for 2024, winning the award for the second successive year after her victory last year. Impressive. The women never disappoint, Kadi.
And speaking of women never disappointing, Funke Akindele's Everybody Loves Jennifer has broken the record for Nollywood's highest grossing one-day performance, as well as the biggest opening weekend of all time. In an announcement by film distributors Film 1 NG, the film grossed a staggering 87.8 million naira on its first day and 206 million naira in its opening weekend.
Impressive, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So women never disappoint, as you said.
Never disappoint. We always represent. So what are some of the things that you're saying about the big stories this morning? Kadi, where do we start from?
Naturally, the win by Nigerians yesterday. We talk about all the flags that we get here and there, but I don't think we talk about our wins enough. The fact that we have Nigerians doing the country proud, both home and what we call abroad. And of course, our sportsmen and women did not disappoint yesterday. A lot of us were anticipating that night, the CAF Awards. What would be the lot of our nominees for the men's and women's categories? Well, we're happy to tell you, just in case you have not heard yet, that Ademola Lookman is the best footballer in Africa and one of the top footballers in the world. And I think that's naturally inevitable because of his performance, playing in Europe's big league, scoring hat tricks, just doing great stuff. So congratulations, Ademola Lookman. But he's not the only one.
Congratulations to Chiamaka Nnadozie. Yeah. We're talking about women representing and never disappointing. They also represented well, by picking up the women's team of the year, the Super Falcons, and that is coming despite the challenges that they faced during the year, particularly during the games, at the Paris Olympics. So congratulations to the Super Falcons. We are super proud of you.
I must say that we still have some sort of grouse against the awards. There are some awards we expected to come our way, didn't come our way. There are some, shortlists we expected to be there, but we didn't get there. But we'll talk about that, some other time. But let's talk about what you were saying about Ademola Lookman being crowned the African Player of the Year. And there you see, this is a moment he got that award. First, we need to talk about Ademola Lookman's outfit. I mean, look
very
at that.
Nigerian.
Very beautiful. The Yoruba Agbada. I removed the demon part because clearly this is not a demon. This is a great guy right here. So he represented across board. You can see football governing heads, both internationally and continentally, giving him that.
And I know one person who would have carried a placard to Morocco had Ademola Lookman not won this award, and that person is sitting right over there, Jeffrey. Jeffrey had begun this campaign months ago, and he had advocated that the award deservedly should go to Ademola Lookman. So I'm sure Jeffrey's very happy.
Definitely, because it's inevitable, as I said earlier on. All of the stats go in his favor. I mean, this is not to take away anything from the other footballers in Africa, but you look at Ademola Lookman, you look at his stats, his goals, his assists, how he shows up for big games, both for country and for club, and you know that it was a no-brainer. But let's take comments from Victor. I imagine that this is not Victor Osimhen, but of course his teammates have been congratulating him. Victor says, well-deserved. He's been fantastic for his club and country. Congratulations, Lookman.
And Candy Love is also profuse in his comment, and her comment, and they say, incredible journey. Ademola Lookman's rise is a true testament to resilience and hard work.
This next user, Bankole, says Ademola Lookman thanking the world in Yoruba. Our very own Omoluabi carrying Nigeria with pride.
And Jerry also says, of course, we're bringing you that sound bite very soon, but Jerry says he's winning it back to back. Come this same time, December, he'll be crowned best in Africa again, 2025.
I like that. No harm being a little twist.
We're very miserly with our awards, right?
Yes.
We don't like them going outside.
Because we keep it well.
The Nigerian flag.
Osimhen kept it very well, handed over to Lookman. But let's listen to what Lookman said right after winning that award. So take a listen.
Talk about total representation. I mean, the humility in this speech, the inspiration in the speech, and, the identification with your home country. Total representation.
So this is what we should be arguing about. This is what we should be talking about.
No.
And I think it's also a pointer to the fact that, fix the police. Also, let's fix our sports system and make sure that we're able to replicate hundreds, thousands more Ademola Lookman, hundreds, thousands more Chiamaka Nnadozie, hundreds, thousands more Super Falcons, Super Eagles. That's also the conversation we should be having, right?
But it would be remiss of us not to look at the whole perspective, all-encompassing, because all of the issues are interconnected in one way or the other.
Absolutely, but this right here for me deserves my attention.
Well, everything deserves our attention, Gadi. But that's not all. What else deserves our attention? It's how to fund the budget, looking away from oil revenue, or the petrodollars. What are the non-oil sources that we can explore and exploit to ensure that we fund the budget and maybe someday look away from borrowing? So we have experts to weigh in on this issue, and you should be a part of it. So join us after this time out. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Let's talk about the economy. Tomorrow, hopefully, it's supposed to be today, I think it's now tomorrow, the president should be presenting the budget to the joint session of the National Assembly. And we expect it to be in the region of 47 trillion naira. That's going to be the highest in Nigeria's history, to the best of my knowledge. But when you look at it in dollar terms, may not necessarily be, because of the devaluation of the naira and how the naira has received a lot of beating since the unification of the FX market. We're going to look at all of that, but the focus will primarily be how do we close or reduce this deficit we always have on our budget? How do we diversify? But we're going to piggyback on some of the things that have been released by the Statistics Bureau, the MBS, and we're being joined in the program by Dr. Oni Mobolaji Johnson. He's the chairman, Sunshine Energy, member, Entrepreneurship Development Committee of ICANN. He joins us via Zoom. Dr. Titilayo Fowokon, member, Governing Council, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, joining us via Zoom, and Dr. Nwani, Vice President, Research and Thought Leadership, FMDQ, Director, Research and Policy Advocacy at the LCCI. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Gentlemen and lady, I must say.
Good morning.
My apologies. So let's start with you, Dr. Johnson. And before we get to how to diversify, let's maybe speak to some of the numbers we've seen. We've seen the MBS release some numbers in recent time. It started off from employment numbers down to the GDP numbers that is now at 3.46. And then we had the MBS release the latest inflation numbers, keep pegged at 34.6 as the latest inflation number from 33.8. And then food inflation has gone even further up by 39.93%. So I would like you to speak to some of these numbers and what they represent to the economy, but especially that has to do with unemployment numbers, going from 5% or so to about 4.3. The concern here is that because of the model we're using and the methodology, it may be misguiding the policymakers and giving them a false sense of hope that things are working when using models like working for 1 hour in a week as a standard for somebody that is employed. I would like you to speak to these issues, especially this particular unemployment. Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patrick. The standard they use is totally not acceptable all over the world. You can't use a 1 hour to benchmark whether someone is working or not. Of course, the reality we have in the country now shows that a lot of company is going to lay off staff because of the cost of running their business. So National Bureau of Statistics has to do more in using what is a benchmark. The benchmark everywhere all over the world is 80 working hours to show that somebody is fully employed. So the statistic, the data they use, the source of the data they use and the benchmark they use is totally wrong. And then they need to do more on that to what is realizable, to what is reasonable, and to what is obtainable in other climates. Now, we'll want to remark shortly on the issue of budget. You said the 47.9 trillion budget against 18.2 trillion we have 2024. And that is also a reflection on how our Naira has been totally been devalued. So in returns, looking at the cost of energy, which is a major determinant of inflation, energy in the public sector or private sector of establishment, it increased the cost of doing things, and this producer, this organization, they has a limit to which they can increase the price. So it's start to do with who is going to bear the burden, and some of them will look inwardly on what they can do with lesser staff, and that is why we have and will continue to have high unemployment rate. And also some that are collecting a salary previously and considering the cost of taking transport to the place of their work, and you discover that it doesn't really worth it. So all these are really making people to be technically unemployed. Some people that even put in the net of employment, they are technically unemployed. So that is a fact we have facing us in the country as we speak. Thank you.
All right, let's get to Dr. Titilayo before my colleagues come in. I want you to speak to the core issue that we're having, because when they present the budget, and of course the Ministry of Finance breaks down all the details as to what is allocated to what ministry, what are the shortfalls, how we're going to close the gap in terms of funding and all of that. Definitely we're going to borrow, and we're still borrowing. And the whole idea is to see how we can minimize borrowing or not borrow at all, if that is even possible. But I want you to piggyback on the fact that the numbers released in our foreign trade which for me looks like money illusion, excess in terms of 5 trillion naira. But if you look at the core element of that export, over 80% of it has to do with anything that has to do with crude oil and associated things within the petroleum sector. That means we're not diversifying enough. Agriculture, for instance, is about 4% of our export. So what is it in your view that this government needs to start looking at to ramp up so that revenue sources besides the optimization we see in the incoming tax bill will be a lot better so that we're less dependent on crude oil?
Thank you very much. This topic is something that is really, this is the right time we should be talking about it. And when we talk about diversification, we have to look at where did we start from. I always say it anytime I have opportunity to talk about how Nigeria got to where we are. There used to be a time where we have the groundnut pyramid, and that is when we gave agriculture the pride of place. And I think we have to go back to that era when we start talking about diversification. We have all it. We have the land. We have the arable lands. We can actually use that. We know we are battling with the issues of insecurity, which I believe that for where we don't have that challenges, how can we best use what we have, and that is our land, to be able to generate enough products for export? And this is an opportunity where we need to harness a lot of time. We have so much that we can get out of here. Every time we talk about our own products, how can we get this into the external market as much as possible? And this will also drive our foreign exchange, because export is a means whereby we can raise this foreign exchange that seems to be an issue for our day. Now, let's also come back to, apart from agriculture, because we're talking of diversification, let's leave the tax revenue, because tax can only come where there's an income or there's a profit. But if you're not making the economy so good, you can't talk about getting tax revenue. Now, let's look at our solid minerals. We have quite a lot of states that we have deposits of solid minerals. We had a time where, I think somewhere in Osun State, there was that complaint that foreigners come there, they come and just get the minerals there. They don't pay anything to the government, and they make good with this money. So how best can we now use this? Because these are things that we have that are natural to us, that God has blessed us with as a nation. Then how do we turn this into economic development for the country? How do we make sure that this generates that fund we need, that foreign exchange we need? This is where government should be looking at. They should be looking at what do we have. And at times we say for Nigeria that we actually import what we have and export what we don't have. But in this instance, we need to look at what do we have that can make more revenue for government. And then we start having less, because I see the budget. The budget is saying that we are going to start looking for additional borrowing to fill the deficit. And we are not even going to look at this additional borrowing from even the external, because we seem to have used our lifelines in the external. We now have to look at the domestic. So the question we're now going to be asking ourselves is, if we are looking at funding the budget from the domestic environment, and that means we're still coming back to the business environment, to the business world, how do we make sure that the businesses are okay to be able to even fund this for government? And that takes us into industrialization. Because if we want to talk about diversification, we must create an environment where there's infrastructure, where we can actually get the research and development. Government should start looking into this. What are the things that we can do that will make us to be, as much as possible, less dependent on imports? And that's where our problem, the resolution of the issues will start from. Our level of dependence on import needs to go down. And we should start looking at how do we get things out of this country to other countries. We have the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and the area. How best are we going to harness this? Now, moving out of that, how best can we get it out of the African environment to all the other worlds? I know some of the foreigners come to Nigeria, they appreciate our culture, they appreciate our clothes, so they want to get something done. How can we get our small and medium to be developed such that they can work? Because there are the people in these areas of this level of economy, and they employ quite a lot of people. So government needs to look into these areas. Agriculture, our solid minerals, how do we get infrastructure to be there? And that is where they have to talk about partnership with the private sector. At times, we cannot leave government to do everything, though people feel government should be able to do it. But I believe that partnering with private sector, bringing some level of of accountability and being able to run this project effectively.
So, still exploring, other non-oil non-oil sources of revenue besides agriculture. The report came through last year that non-oil sources surpassed, oil revenue from oil by, about 67%. And this year, the Immigration Service is reporting, surpassing its targets to the tune of about 5 trillion naira. Now, what is the potential of, funding the budget from non-oil sources, and at what cost does it come to the economy? I'm taking this to Mr. Vincent now.
All right, thank you for having me. We've been on this conversation for too long. The need to diversify Nigeria's revenue from oil cannot be overemphasized, and my colleagues on this panel have also alluded to this. And your question is, how do we do that? I think the starting point will be to look at the quick wins, and also look at what we can do in the medium term and long term. Because if we say the answer will just be diversification, yes, that's correct, that's sustainable, but that is probably on the medium to long term now, because you want to put infrastructures in place, you want to put some reform in place, and you want to put the regulatory and policy environment in place. All this takes time. So I think that the starting point will be to look at what Nigerians are doing now and what they are doing best, and see what we can harness from that. What are our comparative advantage, over the world right now? And I look around, like my colleague said, she talked about our culture, she talked about the way the world sees us. Our entertainment industry, be it in music, be it in Nollywood, it's making wave all over the world. How do we leverage on this potential? How do we leverage on this potential? During the intro, you and your colleague mentioned what Funka Kendele's new premiere is doing around revenue within the first week. And we can replicate this on many platforms. So how do we get all of these things done? So I think that we have to start by first retaining what we have already. Over the last 5 years, we saw about 80 multinationals either left Nigeria or downsize or park their, close shops. How do we even retain what we have and ensure that this bleeding stops? That is a starting point. In 2024 alone, about 10 multinationals have also exited. Last week or so, Netflix, that was even powering the entertainment sector, something happened, and they were rebooted whether they left or not, but something is not the way it should be. So I think the starting point is one, to stop the bleeding. And this is the low-hanging fruit. How do we channel our tax into harnessing these areas I've mentioned that Nigeria can quickly harness? The IT, the ICT, Nigerians are also doing a bit better in these areas. And we probably don't need to have 24 hours electricity or build road or rail from one end of the country to the other. That will take time before we harness all these areas. This is not a consulting session, but I think on a top level, we need to plan and look at scenario analysis to identify these areas that Nigerians can even harvest right now, within the next 6 months to 1 year, to be able to fund our budget, because the budget kickstarts in 2-3 weeks' time. So where do we get the money and reduce deficit? That is the conversation now. That's the conversation now. The tax revenue, we saw, I think the Q2, that's quarter 2 2024, clearly suggests that tax revenue from corporates have fallen by about 28-30%. Right. And we know the reasons for that. The operating environment, business environment is exacerbated by inflation, by exchange rate issue impacted corporate organizations in Nigeria. They are now making losses. And like you said before, when you make loss, you cannot pay taxes. So it's a hydra-headed monster, and I think the first thing is for us to look inward and to look at the low-hanging fruits that we can pick up. And the major hanging fruit, apart from tax revenue and all these areas, if you ask me, is for us to look at how we can harvest the strength of Nigerians in diaspora.
All right, we'll explore that point, a very vital point you've made, Dr. Wani. And when you said earlier on that this is not a consulting session, I think Nigeria can do with a little bit of consultation here and there from people like you, right? And I would like to just go back to Dr. Mobolaji Johnson on this one. Quite a number of points have been raised already, and we'll try to explore them. But ultimately, this conversation is about finding solutions, right? And I'd like you to speak to this point. Let's imagine that the budget is passed by January or before January, and that we have these challenges still staring at us, right? Do you think it's also a disservice to actualizing at least a smooth budget implementation that we've not been able to also pass or agree on the tax reform bills?
Yeah, you see, never envisage that we are going to have a smooth sailing, because the principal determinant of the budget, like you rightly mentioned or pointed out, is oil. And looking at what is happening in concerning the Russian-Ukraine war, coming in of American president, that is President Trump, we foreseen that the war may likely stop. And then once that happens, it may also reduce the cost of oil in the country, in the international market. And Nigerian will depend so much on this budget because of oil, the price of oil. So that is number one. Number two, on the tax reform bill, yeah, government have really announced to do more by getting so many people into the tax net. Many international organizations that do business in Nigeria without charging people VAT. Government have really, in the new tax bill, they have really set out their tentacle, their net, to make sure they can capture into the tax net. We have value-added tax moving from 7.5% to 10% and thereafter to 15%. So there is a projection that we are going to have more of tax if that one escapes through. Now, but with what we have seen so far, with discussion on the scene on the issue of the tax reform bill, we have issue. And the issue is basically on the issue of VAT. Now, before now, you know that VAT are shared by federal government, state, and the local government. The former tax law, the former bill, the former practice is federal government take 15%, the state take 50%, and then the local government take 35%. But now we have a proposed bill that is suggesting 10% to federal, 55% to state, and 35% to local government. But that's not the issue. The issue is from 50% to state, the sharing formula is used to be at the ratio of 40, 40, 20. 40 from the land size, population, and then 20% on derivation. Now we're having a reversal of that. We're having 60, 40, 40. 60, 40, 40 on derivation. So if we really need the concept of the Northerner to really see positively in the light of this, the need for them to develop their region and allow this tax reform bill to really escape through. So if that's happened, then we'll be talking about, okay, the projection of government on the tax reform bill will be achievable. And another thing we also have to lay emphasis on, comparing 2023-24 budget, 2024 budget, this current year budget, the cost of servicing debt is 45% of the total budget. And we are still borrowing more. The cost of servicing debt, not to refund the debt, is 45% of the total budget. And we have the increase of 30%. So, and this money we are paying in dollars, especially external debt. So, we are still going to pay. So, and we are still borrowing more, just like you rightly mentioned. So this indices is still going up. So all these factors we need to really be looked into, and before the budget, so say, can be a smoothing sailing budget. And I also want to call the attention of Nigerians to this, because when we say 4.79 trillion, it's just a figure. And that really represents how our Naira has been solely devalued. We have 2024, we have 18.32 trillion. Now 2025, we are talking about 4.9 trillion. 2024 budget is benchmarked on 750 Naira per dollar. Now federal government, because they want to make more, of course, you know, they throw to the air to caution the exchange rate regulation. Custom, somebody mentioned that they discovered that custom generates more. They will generate more because they are using 1,004 Naira to dollar against what the budget benchmark of 750 Naira. So what we see now that is like something like giving hope, it is a false hope. And it's really imparted because of the exchange rate that the custom is using. So nothing is changing. So except the issue of tax reform bill is well addressed and annexed, and the Northerners see to this in a positive light, except the issue of the, and the government should not expect so much more on the revenue from oil, because with what we have, we accept that we are having an increase in our generation about 2.6 million barrels per day. But when we are talking about international price of oil, for what we are looking at in the future, in the next year to come, after the end of the Ukraine and the Russian war, there is possibility of fall in the price of oil at the international market. So we have to really be very careful of this. We have to note all this. And then before we can say a budget, 2025 budget will be a smooth sailing budget. So we, with what we are looking at now, it's not going to be so. Thank you.
Let's bring you in, Dr. Titila. So our debt is big. I think about 140-something trillion. And then, of course, we're still raising Euro bonds. It was oversubscribed. Our interest rates, that for the people that are getting these Euro bonds, of course, it's good business for them. But for those of us who are paying, who are Nigerians, the Nigerian state is borrowing is high, because there has to be, they added the premium, it's about 9%. And there are other encumbrances that is really checking on our books. We've been able to securitize what we inherited from the Buhari administration to about 40 or 30 years in terms of the ways and means. So there's a lot hanging around. But let's talk about the low-hanging fruit. I saw a trade document in the 60s that showed that cocoa, granules, and the palm oil raked in more revenue for us in terms of FX than even crude oil and all the oils that you can talk about. I'm talking about crude oil, for instance. So we missed something. So what can we do in terms of agriculture? The GDP numbers that were released in Q3 that showed that our GDP appreciated by 3.46. But year on year, we could see that it was just about 1.2%, which is not good by any standard. Even if the government celebrates that it grew, but that is not something to really celebrate. Something is missing. Agriculture is the highest contributor to GDP. But when it comes to revenue, it is still oil. How do we reposition agriculture to begin to make that money we're looking for? We're blessed with arable land all over the country.
Okay, thank you for that. I just thought back when you mentioned cocoa and the likes. And coming back to agriculture, if we look at most of our states, and when you talk of cocoa, you're talking about the states in the Ondo area, the Ondo, the Osun, the Ekiti side. When you're talking about some of these things, palm plantation, and all these things are things which over there outside Nigeria are things that they are looking for. For instance, there was a time we were talking about our matches. That why would we import matches? But you now have people come here, take some of this product, take it abroad, and then make it, improve it, and sell it back to us. And we import and we use our foreign exchange to import it and put pressure on the foreign exchange. One thing we need to do, and I was good, I heard one of our panelists talk about low-hanging fruits. Agriculture is our low-hanging fruit. We need to now start to look at what have we not done well? How did we move away? Because when we started seeing oil, we forgot all those other things that have been able to give us that foreign exchange, that export, that market outside there. And we need to come back. we have to look back at our cocoa. What have we done? What is the problem? Where have we missed it? And I want to believe that every state government is going to start looking back into agriculture because it is sustainable. Apart from talking about taxation, which is dependent on your income, agriculture is another sustainable means of growing the economy. And not just agriculture now. How do we get this produce in such a way that they get outside the borders of Nigeria as much as possible? We are talking about exports. A lot of things that we can do on export side. We have goods that we can export on the agriculture side. I know a lot of people talk about shea butter. I can actually go into that. We'll talk about food crops. I have a friend who actually called me and said, oh, I need to have dried fish. In the UK and in the US, how do we come back and look at these things? Food. Areas of agriculture gives us that food that we can move at. How do we now come and look at how best can we package this in such a way that it can be exported? There's a lot of sayings in the media about export business, but I've had people that went into it, but they're not getting that support of government. How will government now come educate people? I believe education does a lot. There are a lot of people that are there, unemployment. We're talking of unemployment. How do we create an avenue whereby we bring all these resources, these youthful resources, these human resources together to be able to develop the agri business? And we must not remove industrialization. Now, we have good products here that comes from our farm. How do we now make sure that they are protected, they are preserved, such that we can get them into the export market? Unfortunately, there's a sad story that I hear that now we have the injection of our agri products into, and then this now becomes putting some things into it to make it to be bigger, to make it to, we don't need this. Our lands are very good. So what I would plead to government is to come back home and see how we can get this, our agri produce, the cocoa, the cotton. In fact, cotton is another area that we are losing out. We talk about fabrics. We have good fabrics in this country, and the backward integration for fabric is cotton. How do we go back into our cotton growth? And in the North, and that's why I want to really plead with people in the North, my fellow colleagues in the North, the governors in the North, to look at some of these things. Cotton is a product from the North. How can this be transformed? We now talk about textile. We lost our textile industry. These are good textiles. How do we go back and create that? So that this, one of the panelists says, let us keep what we have. How do we keep what we have to be able to? So government should come back home. Let's not just talk about it. Let's make it work.
All right.
And with this, we can actually start talking about exports. Right. We can talk about foreign exchange input. Now, the more we export, the more we are able to have this balance in the foreign exchange pressure. And we are already talking about 1,400 in the budget. Now, but in the reality, when we go out there, it's about 1,007, 1,006. So we need to really bridge this gap.
All right, Dr. Faulkner, you talked about mineral resources earlier, and you know there's a lot also to explore in that space. You could look at gold, for instance, and there seems to be, as far as mineral resources are concerned, there seems to be some of inertia, non-activity as far as processing is concerned. Nigerians prefer to purchase gold outside the country, even though the raw material is here, but very little processing is happening. Look at rubber, the tire manufacturing companies have all exited. So what are we missing in that space? And would it be instructive to look at perhaps, a constitutional amendment where states can intervene in exploiting raw materials? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, which is also related, there seems to be some progress in the area of assembling for manufacturing of cars, but Nigeria spends about $8 billion annually on vehicle importation. So what is the opportunity costs that Nigeria is missing in the area of car manufacturing, and how we can also scoop some form of revenue from that sector? Dr. Wani, that's for you.
Oh, thank you very much. Car manufacturing, that's interesting. Car assembly, that's interesting, The last time I checked, on the Nigerian road, we have about 14 million vehicles on Nigerian road, which is quite a huge number. Even if we want to measure on the parts, vehicle parts, to service those 14 million vehicles. On the annual basis, Nigeria inject about 300,000 to 400,000 new vehicles, not new ones, the ones we call fairly used as Tokumbo and the new ones combined. This is from the licensing office. But the sad part of it is that the brand new vehicles, out of these 300 to 400,000 vehicles, the brand new vehicle is about 20,000 vehicles, all of them imported. Most of them imported. Very few are either serving as the full knockdown or the semi-knockdown SKD, that we saw in Austin and some other assembly plants doing. The challenge to car assembly plants in Nigeria is still the same challenge facing the industry. We cannot talk too much about the electricity supply here, but what is actually affecting the car industry in Nigeria is that for you to either manufacture car, you need about 20,000 different parts. Of course, the electric car is coming, but we're talking about petrol-powered engines now. What are the things we can bring in as input from Nigeria? Of course, we're down with rubber. We don't manufacture rubber. We have steel. Steel is a major input into car manufacturing. We are not there. Even if it's the brake pad, which is part of rubber and some other components. So charity begins at home. And we've seen a lot of the time Nigeria partner or license car assembly plants to come and operate in Nigeria. But these issues continue to affect them. We will see some of them, after licensing them, they went to a nearby country, Ghana, set up something there, and from there they bring in things into the country. So the challenge is not that people don't want to do business in Nigeria and they explore our huge market, almost 240 million people, but the ease of doing business. And like I said before, these are low-hanging fruits. Addressing the ease of doing business challenge will not only unlock car assembly in Nigeria, and we begin to either manufacture cars or even do the assembly very seriously. But we need to look at the ease of doing business, multiple taxation, security issues, the FS crisis. Ease of doing business affect both car assembly, manufacturing of whatever type of thing we want to look at. So that's a major challenge. There are about 26 different car brands, operating in Nigeria. But what are they operating in? They are just bringing cars and they are selling, through their trading companies. This needs to be changed, and I think it is time that we look at even Nigerians that are in that space and see how we can partner them and see how we can encourage them. The huge amount of money spent by state governors, the State House of Assembly, the Federal House of Assembly, the Senate and the National Assembly, the presidency, the ministers, in buying cars every year. Look at the 2024 budget or even the draft 2025 budget. You see huge amount of money in hundreds of billions allocated for cars. Can we say that at least 50% of these cars have to be Nigerian assembled? Charity begins at home. And if our politicians can show that example, I believe and I know that corporate leaders, companies can also follow suit. So I think that these reforms need to start from the top, on what we eat, on what we use. And if we start with cars, I think it will go a long way.
Thank you to Mr. Mobolaji Johnson. Your last thoughts on this particular issue, maybe speaking to how we can explore the capital market. We're already doing that with some of the things we are raising, but how we can be more effective in raising these monies and possibly to cut our quota according to our cloth, as they say, although people are saying, which is arguably correct, that our budget size is quite small, but given that our revenue is not as big as it should be, shouldn't we be cutting our cloth according to our cloth?
That is the first step to solve this problem. We need to cut our coat according to our size, or our dress, our clothes according to our size. Yeah, you see, government's revenue is not sufficient to their expenditure, and then we still have to borrow. Why must we need to borrow? We need to look at what do we spend money on. I only have the statistics of 2023-2024 budget. We have about 45% of the budget on recurrent expenditure. You cannot take that away. And then we servicing of debt, of course, that one is still ongoing, like I've said. And then the other statutory transfer, that one is going higher. That one has to do with government lifestyle. I don't expect in this kind of our economy, somebody's going to for occasion, and we have a convoy, about 10 or 20 vehicles and a convoy. We really need to cut it. If you are saying, yes, Nigeria, we don't have money, our government have to lead by example. They have to live. Also, that has to affect their lifestyle, the way they live. What are we spending money on? It is very sad to note that 2023 compared to 2024, we only have about a few, minus 3% in the budget of capital expenditure. So you see, when we source for money, when you borrow, what do you borrow for? Do you borrow to finance lifestyle of some selected few? Or do you borrow to pay loan? It is very, very heartbreaking that when you borrow to pay loan. Now, and that is the reason why looking forward on the issue of the infrastructure, I rather prefer, apart from what the panelists have said, that we really need to diversify our economy. Then there are some other things we also need to do, which is tasked to infrastructural swap, which is a need for us. And that's the best way to actually finance our infrastructure. Now, what do you borrow for? You borrow for corruption. You borrow money to repair the road, and 40% of the money you budgeted to repair the road is going to somebody's pocket. What do you borrow for? You borrow to finance lifestyle. So you're talking about raising funds. We actually have to, what we raise funds for has to be tied with infrastructure, has to be tied with a particular project that will really need to monitor and ensure that that project well executed. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your thoughts. As always, Dr. Oni Mobolaji Johnson is the chairman, Sunshine Energy, a member Entrepreneurship Development Committee of ICANN. Joining us via Zoom, Dr. Titilayo Fawokon, member, Governing Council of Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, Dr. Wani, Vice President, Research and Thought Leadership, FMDQ, Director of Research and Policy Advocacy at the LCCI. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for bringing your thoughts on this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll switch gears to other issues of importance. Maybe just hang around. We may be talking about sports next. Join us again.